I will hand over to Felicia Newton with her speech, When Your Enemy is the Enemy. Felicia, with Your Enemy is Your Enemy.
Thank you so much. A pleasant good morning to all of you. It is indeed awesome to be at this conference. It's been so amazing so far. Thank you, Dr. C, my mentor, for this opportunity to grace your platform. I'd like to dive right in. You know, growing up, I just believed that I can be anything that I wanted to be. A teacher, a doctor, an electrician. I wanted to be a preacher. Growing up in the Bahamas, I went to church more days than I can actually count. I went to 2 to 3 services on a Sunday. There was Monday prayer meeting, Wednesday Bible study, Friday youth meeting, Saturday choir rehearsal, just to do it again Sunday. Furthermore, I actually enjoyed going to church and reading my Bible. My heart was fixed. I was going to be a preacher. And everyone around me, they knew this. My desire to preach was not far-fetched. It did not seem insurmountable, neither unachievable. This was a self-induced thought born out of my womb of faith, and there were no competing internal voices attempting to dissuade me. Or were there? On the one hand, I had, Felicia, you can do it. There's nothing stopping you. Go for it. But on the other hand, there was this nagging voice that said, there is nobody in your family that has done this before. Furthermore, you don't even have the resources to go to seminary. How is this even possible? As I grew older, my focus, it readjusted. My paradigms, they shifted. And the externalities of self-doubt and self-sabotage, they weighed in, and I started to drown. I later learned that this was the phenomenon called imposter syndrome. And this is where a person experienced feeling like a phony in some area of their life, even though they had had previous success. Somehow, beknownst to me, I had been feeding an internal force that had now matured and was stronger than ever. There was a war waging. This was a battle that I was not prepared for. The enemy had been discovered to be in a part of the enemy, and it spoke louder and clearer and consistent about my lack and my limitations. I was no longer driven, motivated, inspired, ambitious, or fearless. My faith had now become obscure. There were internal voices that were incessantly informing my course of actions. I eventually gave in. I was no longer the victor I believed myself to be. The enemy inside of me dictated that I was to be the victim. I no longer spoke of my accomplishments as winnings, but from a place of whining. My L's were now losses and not lessons learned. My enemy had become so overwhelmingly powerful and monstrous and destructive, and the internal fight to divide asunder self from self was seemingly impossible. The uphill battle of me versus me, the realization that my enemy had become my enemy, was cannibalistic at its core. I felt defeated, hopeless, helpless, stuck, slowly dying. But see, that's not how my story ends. There is actually good news. My saving grace was the tenets of those who believed in me, the faith of those around me. They had encouraged me and lifted up my bowed head. Those were the folks that had planted seeds of hope and faith in some time past. Their words were now started to take root. I started to believe in me again. I started to internalize the positives I had heard. I paid attention to the voices within that were speaking differently from what I wanted my truth to be. I started visualizing myself in a better place, financially, new employment, new circle of people who mirrored where I wanted to be, showing up at engagements, networking, affirming myself. Shh. Do you hear that? The deafening silence was the lowered voice of my enemy. Almost as if none existed, I had finally lowered the amplification of my enemy's voice and reinforced that enemy from childhood who believed all things were possible. Things started to fall in place, almost as if coincidentally. I started to dream again, but this time with great intentionality. I envisioned those things I desired, and as I saw them, they actually came to be. One of my greatest accomplishments, once I learned to lower the voice of my enemy, was meeting Dr. Hasib. You see, I had listened to the enemy tell me that I did not have what it took to complete my degree program, so why bother? I danced to this tune until the last 2 weeks of my first semester, when I realized procrastination was waving its victory flag. There was no way I was going to be able to complete 11 weeks worth of work in 2 weeks while working full time. I remember being on campus and crying because I lost. I lost time. I lost finances and a sense of self. Why did I bring myself to such shame? This was the day that I convinced me to quit. I packed up my belongings and made my way to the vending machine for that final goodbye snack. And guess who was walking by? Dr. Hasib. Talk about an on-time intervention. I got to telling him about the challenges that I had actually brought upon myself, but was not brave enough to tell him that I quit. Dr. Hasib listened and helped me come up with a plan to complete and submit all of my past due assignments on time, but more importantly, a prevention plan for the remaining semesters. Fast forward, I stayed attuned and sought help when needed. I felt stronger and inspired and faith-filled because deep down, I wanted to successfully complete the program, and things and people started to fall in alignment. I completed the program, earned my second graduate degree, was introduced to two highly esteemed folks who would later be mentors at a job that I had envisioned, but really had no concrete proof that this was going to be my reality. Shh. Do you hear that? I figured out how to turn the volume down on the enemy. And as I get ready to pass this virtual mic, I'd like to leave you with a few reminders. You cannot separate you from you. However, when your enemy rises up and it feels like it's now your enemy, you have all control to subdue it. Pay attention to those feelings. They are usually the manifestation of your thoughts. What are you telling you? What are you thinking about? What are you believing about you that you know is untrue? Third and lastly, amplify your positive thoughts. Affirm yourself, look in the mirror and say your name and say you can achieve anything that you focus your time and energy towards. You are first in command and you can control the volume of the negative chatter. I want to thank you for your time and attention.